Hi everyone. As promised, I wanted to put together a video about the expectations for the assessment report for this class. So I'm going to take my video off now and go through the template. You will be getting this template. You've already gotten part of it in your critical reflection. So you guys have all done this section here and also the health records. For the instruments used, that's where you're going to write about the norm-referenced formal assessment, which is the Woodcock-Johnson that we're learning in class. For the criterion reference assessment, that could be the Brigance, like we learned first, the first 2 weeks, or it could be easy CBM or Dibbles. It just depends on your student. Ames Web is another common one that's used, or if your school is doing something else. So we don't want to give them more tests just to give them tests. We instead want to use what's already being used to measure some certain criteria. The work sample you're going to choose based on highlighting what the student's strengths are, and then also more examples to support, maybe the areas of growth that for the student. This could be teacher or teachers, so I could actually put a parenthesis around that. But really for this class, only one. And then you should always have a student interview, talk to them about what you're doing, what their interests are, what their preferences are, what their strengths are, and then also where they think they need to grow. And then I highly recommend a family interview. You also will have a classroom observation, so you can go in and just kind of see what's going on in the classroom as well. And then here's the hearing, vision, and if they have any other health information, which I've asked you to get. So then you're going to go through and you're going to give some background about the student. So one of the areas where you can get this background information is from these different interviews, but also from what's called a psych ed report. So I'm going to pull this up really quickly. And here's a sample psych ed report, and I've gotten rid of all of the identifying information, but basically they go through and they tell why the student was referred for special ed, what their disability is and what it means. It goes through and talks about the assessments used and the background information, so it gives you, that the student is of Hispanic descent, Spanish is spoken in the home, that the developmental history is significant for premature delivery. So there's some pretty detailed information here that you wouldn't necessarily need, but sometimes it's good information to have in context of understanding that student. Here's the teacher information, and then here is how the disability was determined. So here you can see that the DOS-2 was given, and you can see that certain tests were below average. So we're looking at the verbal cluster, word definitions, the sequential and quantitative reasoning, and the general conceptual ability. And then they go through and the psychologist goes through and explains all of this. You can go through and read about that and then understand a little bit more about how the brain is working for that child. Here's a phonological processing test and academic achievement. So here you can see this is the Wyatt that they did for this student. That's the equivalent of the Woodcock-Johnson. Here's the RAT. This is kind of the equivalent of, it's a criterion referenced and normed test, but it's like the Brigance, and it only has these 4 sections. So then it goes through and does a little summary, and then based on those tests, that's how the learning disability, specific learning disability, was identified. And then the psychologist signs it. And so that you can use this report, which is oftentimes in their file, or some teachers don't feel comfortable with you having access to this, so it's not a requirement, but it's helpful for understanding your students. But you just have to find out what your site decides about that. So anyway, so you can just give like a brief educational history. So this is, what their experience has been in school. Then you have the family interview, what the family sees as strengths, as areas of need, what they really want for the student. The educator interviews, so could be teachers, or it could be even a vice principal or a attendance liaison or something there. And you can have more than one interview. The student interview, and then of course the classroom observations. Here is the results section. So here's the Woodcock-Johnson. You can see we have the standard score. You can either do age or grade. So if you decide to do age, then you'll erase that part. If you decide to do grade equivalent, you'll erase that part, and then also make sure you erase one of these down here. Then you'll have the percentile rank, which we talked about in class when we had our statistics thing. And then the classification or interpretation. So what does that actually mean for the student? And so I have most of the subtests, but depending on your student's age, they may or may not actually have scores for all of these sections. So you might have to change this chart in some way. And then for this section down here, they also have the RPI. So just to be aware of that. Here's the Brigance scores. So you're going to tell me which subtests you've administered, what the raw score is, the total number of questions, and then the percent correct, and then notes around that. So for example, well, actually, I'll show you some examples in a minute. Then you're going to put a work sample in there, and you're going to insert a picture of it, and then the reasoning. Why did you choose this assignment as an example of the student's ability, and then what directions were given to the student. And then you need to do some qualitative observations. And here you will just, you will write about the qualitative observations during the assessment. So this is just kind of a summary of how well the student did while they were taking the assessment. So this could be that they gave the answers very quickly, or they self-corrected a lot, or they were on task the entire time, or they rushed through. So whatever it is that you saw, remember on your test document, there's that section on the Woodcock-Johnson for qualitative observation. So you can just pull right from there and kind of summarize it in a paragraph. Then you're going to identify at least 3 strengths and provide evidence, and you need qualitative and quantitative. So this is the quantitative data and qualitative data to support your answer. So let's just make sure that we have this for both. I'll give you some examples of what I mean by this. And then you're going to have your areas of growth, same thing. And then whatever your 3 areas of growth are, then you're going to write your 3 IEP goals based on that. So here's some examples of an outline that you can use to write a SMART goal, is what these are called, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this semester. Then you're going to say, okay, now that we've figured out, what the student's really good at, we've figured out, what are some areas of growth, and then we figured out what their IEP goals are. So now we're going to jump into how we're going to monitor whether they're meeting these goals and whether they're getting the support that that you've identified that they could use. And then, how are you going to, so I put here, how will you measure the student's progress on their IEP goals? What systems of communication will you use to ensure all stakeholders, student, teacher, families, etc., have access to the progress reports or progress? So this could be, maybe you create a Google Doc where they, where they score themselves every day or something like that. And then if you have an example of the progress monitoring sheet, you can also add it, but it's not a requirement. Next, you're going to put together just a piece about their collaboration and how you'll be collaborating with the student and the family, any other services. So this could be transition services or any other school staff or somebody else possibly. And then the final piece is the reflection on your assessment process. So there are things that are going to go really well. You're going to be like, oh, I'm so happy that I was able to read the prompts so smoothly. And then there's going to be other places where you're like, I should have had all the materials out beforehand and I forgot to do that. Or, there was a fire drill in the middle of the assessment of the Woodcock-Johnson, and that was the only day the student was there. So whatever went right, whatever went wrong, what you want to do differently next time. So maybe you want to practice more before you actually administer the test, and who you'd like to work closer with. So maybe you wish that you had asked the teacher or the family more questions. And then also, where can you go to support? Where can I go for support in the future? So, this is the psychologist on site, the chair of the department, back to the university because you'll still be here, and if you have questions, we're also here to support you. And then any other thoughts. So I'm going to give you a few examples that I'm going to go through. These are not perfect, but they will at least kind of show you what the expectations are for this report and what an actual report looks like. Whoops. So I'll throw one up there, and then I'll put the other one just over here. And like I said, these are pretty good, but they're not perfect, and we don't have to be perfect. We're just learning right now. So you can see they both put the name in there. They described the disability. This one, she didn't actually describe the disability. So autism spectrum disorder can look very different on different people. So not having that in there is actually kind of pulls away from this report. But we've got 7 years old, first grade. She only wrote down the Woodcock-Johnson, and she didn't give us a description, but you can see here, this student actually wrote down that one sentence that we practice in class so that we know when we see Woodcock-Johnson, oh, that's what the Woodcock-Johnson is. And then she also has the rat, the work sample, the teacher interview, and the classroom observation. Here we also see the eczema, which could affect the student as well. Let me just kind of make this a little bit smaller. So the background information, so we've got a little bit of the background, we've got the family interview, educator interview, student interview, classroom observation, and assessment observation. So she kind of changed the direction that she did these. I prefer that you don't do that, because if we keep with this same format, then anyone can pick up your report, flip around, and know exactly where to find things. This is kind of the template is the accepted format of these types of reports. But you can see the interview is probably much longer, but both students just kind of summarized what happened in the interview, and what happened in the classroom observation. Then the results. So here she's got the Woodcock-Johnson. So here she has the Woodcock-Johnson. You can see that they look a little bit different. As I mentioned before, depending on your student and how many of the subtests they finish, then this is going to be a little different. And you can see they have the standard score, grade equivalent, percentile, and classification, whereas over here she has the age equivalent. And then she's highlighted a few things that she was really looking at. All right, and then she's got the Brigance here, so she's let me know which sections, subtests she put in there, and then how the student did. For the work samples, we've got work samples, we've got pictures, reasoning, directions, and here's the pictures. The reasoning and directions are in a slightly different order. Next we have and then here's the qualitative observations as she wrote. Here's the strengths. Now you can see that she gave actual examples. So while he may need a few prompts such as focus on your work or please keep working to stay focused, Ramon is capable of getting his work finished within the class period. So you can see that that's based on her observation. Also, he kept a positive attitude on the Woodcock-Johnson. He was able to correctly identify 66 of the 76 words that put him in the 41st percentile, which is average. Although he may have shown some struggle with some of the words, he was able to self-correct and correctly identified most words. So you can see that she was able to highlight one of the areas that he did well. Here you have the first strength that Nick has and is shown in the Woodcock-Johnson is editing. And then she gives the actual standard score, percentile, and all of that. And then here on the Brigance, she says, he got 100%. So I might have pushed him to try another subtest that was a little bit harder. So the areas of growth, you can see once again, his standard deviation for science was 55 and social studies was 40. And that doesn't give us too much information, so I would have asked for a little bit more information on that. Whereas she said while administering the rat and the Woodcock-Johnson, Ramon was at times hesitant with his answers and showed low confidence, particularly in math. On the rat, Ramon was able to correctly answer 32 out of 55 questions. But notice that doesn't actually show us the percentile, and the number of questions answered correct that only gives you a raw score. But remember, we talked about the importance of percentile, and so the percentile rank of 9, which is really low. And then here's the 16th, which is also really low. So you see how we need actually some narrative around what these scores are. Here's the IEP goals, and you can see that they identified math, reading, and a behavior goal. You do not need to choose those three. Those are just some examples. And then here's the progress monitoring section where they're going to use curriculum-based evaluations, informal measures such as work, student work, records, and other documents. And that he'll use his 180 reading support program and monitor it on a line graph. And yeah, and then here we've got the parents and the supervisors will receive the parent reports every 3 months. So, it's actually saying, how often people will get feedback from this. Here's the collaboration section. Now, I like this one because it actually has family services and school student or school staff, and then goes through a weekly email with his progress. He'll stay in the after school tutoring and reports to his parents every Friday. This is just your best guess. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just an idea. And then you can see that the reflection, there is a lot of things that went on. So. And then here she also wrote a good reflection. So when you go into a job interview, just so you know, the reflection part, and I'm going to show you 2 more, the reflection part is really important because it allows the person who you're interviewing with, you can say like, oh, here's an example of an assessment report that I wrote, and this is what I learned from it. And they want to see that you are being a critical, reflective person. And so that's why, here we go, we'll just make this a little smaller. That's why it's really important to have that part on here as well. So, okay, let's take a look at 2 more. So then this way you get an idea. So here we go, we've got a 7-year-old, a 2nd grader, and we've got a 12th grader. So these reports are going to look a little bit different. Once again, here, this person actually explains the autism spectrum disorder and what it looks like for Adrian. This one does a little tiny description of the disability of SLD. Here's all the dates of evaluation that she just listed out, and then there's her list. Here we go. She was actually not able to do the whole test, so she wrote about that right here, and that's just fine. Student background, you can see once again, here's all the interviews, a little summary of each one. Here's the Woodcock-Johnson scores, and you can go right away. You can see that the passage comprehension was one of the weaker ones, and then, the math calculation was basically all weak. Written expression was pretty, he struggles there too. Here's the Brigance, and she gave quite a few, but like I said, if I see all 100s, then you need to give more tests because you're not getting a good sense of where they are. Here's the work sample with a picture. Here's the strengths, so you can see she numbered them out. That's fine to do. Another strength was letter word identification. He read 47 words correctly out of 61. He read words like, and then she actually gave them the examples of what these words were, which I like that. But we don't know, oh, here's the 95th percentile for this section. But the raw score, remember, doesn't really help you in understanding. Okay, let's go over here. We've got the student background. You can see that he's got a lot of kind of moving around with schools and living with his grandmother. Here's his grandmother giving some statements, and one of them is pulled from an old IEP, and that's okay to do too. Here is, she went through and talked to multiple educators about the student's strengths, which was a good thing to do as well. And then talked to the student about strengths and interests, did a classroom observation and noticed things. And then here's her Woodcock-Johnson results. And you can see she's got the standard score, grade equivalent, percentile range, and classification. And here's the RAT, because they were able to do the RAT. And then here's a picture of more than one of these assignments so that you can get a better idea of how the student is. And then here is the strengths. And she pulls right from the Woodcock-Johnson, from the RAT, from observing. So now the areas of growth and the IEP. So you can see that the areas of growth should go right along with the IEP goals. They should also give the qualitative and quantitative. Here's her progress monitoring. You see that this is actually quite a long section for progress monitoring. This is just your recommendation, but it shows that she put a lot of thought in, and I like to see that. So, but it's not required. I just want to see that you're actually recording things, you're checking in with the students, you have some sort of system for looking over and making sure that that gets done. The collaboration, so this is both of them did paragraph style of who they're going to talk to and who they're going to work with. So she's got like the speech and language therapist that she'll be working with. Here we've got the para educators who she'll be working with. So these are all important to have. And then once again, the what went right, what went wrong, what would you do differently, who should you work closer with, where can I go for support, and any other thoughts. So hopefully this is helpful, and as always, I am here to support you through the process, so please ask, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.